Round 8 of the Gashimov Memorial was full of drama, but not from the world champion Magnus Carlsen for a change. He played a very mild opening against Sergei Karyakin, and the game ended in a fairly uneventful draw. But let's have a look at the game between Mamedyarov and Nakamura. Now, if you recall, Hikaru lost disastrously against Magnus Carlsen the day before. Let's see what he could do today. So Mamedyarov with the white pieces. Now we joined the position after 16 moves. It's been a Slav, and Mamedyarov has played in a very enterprising way, castling on the queen side. The pawn structure usually determines strategy. So let's have a look. Mamedyarov has these pawns here. Now the pawn on c5 shuts out this bishop, but the bishop can perhaps come to f6 to attack this pawn here. It also gives, white's king a little bit of cover. It's on the king side that there's some interest. Now it looks like black has a very solid structure. He does, but the problem is, what happens if he makes a normal move like castles? Well, here you can see that pawn on g6. That will give white something to bite on. And you can see there's every chance that white, maybe after queen e3, is going to be able to open up the king side. So this is Nakamura's problem. What does he do with his king? Well, he chose a really unusual plan. He first played g5, so the bishop came back. And then he played f5. Now I thought that maybe he could play king here and g6 and king g7, but there are still chances to open up the position with f4. But he played f5. Now this looks extraordinary. Slightly weakens this pawn on e6, or well, it really does weaken it because now it's no longer protected by a pawn. Throwing these pawns up. Now he wants to give his king some room. And in playing like this, keeping the rook on the h-file, he's hoping that he's going to maintain pressure here and prevent white opening up the position. So, very unusual plan. I found this whole game very difficult to understand, I have to say. Mamedyarov played g4, which just about, if black wants to keep the position closed, then just about forces this move. And then king f7. Now, why did Mamedyarov play like this? Because it seems as though the king side is now quite closed. Well, I think one of the plans is that actually white is still able to break open the position with this move. Mamedyarov didn't play like this, but you could do this, sacrificing two pawns, but allowing the bishop to come into the game, looking at this weak pawn. And you can see black's bishop isn't very well placed here. So it'll be possible for white to attack on the E and G files, and the queen could join the fray as well, perhaps coming here. Now Mamedyarov didn't do this straight away, but I think an interesting move for him here would have been to play queen a4. Now this prevents black breaking with b6 because bishop b5 hits the knight. So you wait for a move, and then depending on how black plays, maybe you return to this pawn sacrifice idea. But instead, Mamedyarov played rook e1, which also doesn't look like a bad move. The problem with this was that Nakamura now seized his chance to open the queen side, and the king is sitting on the end of this b-file, and this is already unpleasant. So after pawn takes, rook b8, and this is a very quick attack for black. It's going to be really easy to, play queen b7 and then possibly swing the rook over. And it's already very nasty. So after, over half an hour's thought, Mamedyarov played queen a4. So his idea was this. Well, if pawn takes pawn, then again rook b8 is very nasty. So he played bishop a6. Now this looks very strange, but the point was to take the queen away from protecting this pawn. And it's a very creative plan from Mamedyarov. So the bishop attacks the knight. Now, I thought a reasonable way for black to play this was to trade like this, and with this nice central pawn majority and maybe a bishop coming to f6, I think this is very good for black. But no, Nakamura had something else in mind. He played rook b8. It's a clever idea. So if bishop takes knight, then actually you can win back the bishop, and once you win back the bishop, then the play starts on the b file again. But Mamedyarov now played rook takes e6. This was the point of nudging the queen up the board to c7. So really creative from both players. And Nakamura took the rook after some thought. He could have played in a calmer way with rook takes bishop. And if queen takes, then taking the rook is very safe. But here, well, it trades into a position where material is even, but black has a positional advantage. It's not clear how big that advantage is, but that would be a safe way for Nakamura to play with black. Instead, well, he very bravely took the rook. And now, well, you can see that it's not possible to pick up the bishop with rook b4 because of check. And, well, if the king had come back to f7, then of course you take with check. And after king f6, queen c2 threatens a mate. So in this way, white does not lose material. Okay, so instead Nakamura protected the d pawn. Good move. Now, after the game, both players thought that this might be possible for white. And, when one side has the two bishops, even though white is the exchange down, this is pretty serious compensation. But instead he took, and now there is counterplay on b2. And although the king, well, looks slightly insecure, wandering around in the middle, in fact, it's safe enough. Here, Mamedyarov played bishop d4. Again, maybe he could have checked and played like this, but you feel that here black isn't really in any danger. I mean, here you can exchange queens. Now, again, because white has the two bishops, he has survival chances, but there's no doubt that the game is turning in black's favour. But instead, Mamedyarov played bishop d4, and after this, well, you still have to be careful. For example, here it would be a terrible mistake to take that bishop. Black is a rook up, but suddenly after queen takes g7, this is very nasty. Probably black can survive this, but yeah, black is on the edge here. But instead, Nakamura played king f7. Good move. And, well, takes and h4 is maybe white's best chance here. And still a little bit unclear. But, well, I think once those bishops have been exchanged, I think black should be absolutely fine here. Anyway. But I think that was a better chance than the game. In the game, this happened, and Nakamura's king just stepped to safety. And then it was black's turn to seize the initiative. Excellent move, centralising the queen, setting up threats here and here. And after this, well, it was quite clear that Nakamura was going to win, so that threatens b2 and f3, oops, well, and the other pawn as well, actually. So he's just taking pawns, and really this advance of white's pawns on the queen side, well, it has no real bearing. Nakamura brought the queen back to safety, and, well, it really wasn't any problem for him at all to wrap this game up. So, very difficult game. to assess actually, but I think Nakamura had it pretty much under control. Let me just show you briefly the game between Caruana and Radjabov. Now we reach this position. It's a King's Indian, and black is a pawn up. Radjabov is a pawn up. But white has this far advanced c-pawn. Now here Radjabov thought he should be playing for a win and moved his king up the board. He could have compromised, he realised this. He could have offered a trade of queens, given up this extra pawn, but the king and rook will be able to deal with this pawn successfully, and it should be a draw. The problem is you can see this knight is rather dominated by the bishop, so it can't join the action, and the king is way back here as well. But king h7 happened. I'm just going to go through these next moves fairly quickly. But this sort of allowed white to consolidate his position, and I notice very often in practical play it's the side with the safer king that often has the better practical chances, and I think this is exactly what happens in this game. You can see that white's king here, protected by the knight. That knight is very important. That stops any bishop attacks or some kind of attack against white's king. So the white king completely safe. But black's king is a little bit more insecure. Let's just go through these moves. Basically, you can see the pass pawn on c6 is looking pretty strong. Here, I think black can still defend if he plays something like this, and then bishop e6. So the white knight is still dominated, and then maybe you can create counterplay a bit later, advancing the a pawn. Probably the a pawn and c pawn will be traded, but instead, after this, white's initiative started to grow, and this c pawn becomes way too dangerous. Okay, let me just go to... I just want to show the end of the game, actually. By this stage, I think Radjabov is probably lost. I don't think there's any way to defend. If you trade queens, then you can see that knight is going to come in and force the c-pawn home. But the end of the game is really nice. So there we go, the knight coming in, and f2 is defended by the queen. And after this, okay, basically Caruana has won a piece. Okay, you still need to wrap the game up, and let's just see how he did it. There's a beautiful finish here. I mean, this is still slightly problematic because the knight is sort of tied to defending the king. You always have to watch out for perpetuals, and the knight prevents that for the moment. But you still got to deal with the a pawn too. But watch how Caruana did this. Queen h8 check, the king came up the board, then queen f8. In this position black resigned. It's a beautiful move, prevents the king coming back here, and threatens queen f4 checkmate, a beautiful geometric mate, and the queen prevents queen d6, which would cover the f4 square. So this queen just performs so many functions in this position. It's fantastic. I mean, there's only one move that could stave off mate just for the moment, h4, but it's mate in 2. Takes, and queen h6. I love that finish. Queen h8 and queen f8. Beautiful. So there we go. After 8 rounds, the scores are Magnus Carlsen still in the lead with 5 out of 8. Fabiano Caruana, after that victory, in sole second position with 4.5, and then 3 players on 4, Karyakin, Radjabov and Nakamura. So with 2 rounds to go, it's still wide open.